Um, if you were here last week, there was quite a bit of energy in class. And I was approached by some individuals who were not even in the class about the energy that was in the class. So whatever they had either heard or knew was, at best secondhand. And I'm talking about I was approached like between Bible class and worship and then after worship. That's what I mean. And then through the week, I was approached by an individual who was not in the class and who is not a member of this congregation, but who subsequently had been an online listener to the class. And my teaching is not to be the focal point in this congregation, nor are our differences to be the focal point of this congregation. And that conversation last week was principally between Stephen and I. I don't know Stephen very well, but Stephen and I have worshiped together for a long, long, long time here. And Angie and I have been here for a jillion years. But I do think I know Stephen and Gina well enough to know that at the end of the day, that what he would be most interested in, and what I am most interested in unequivocally, is that Christ be preached and that his crucifixion be preached and that his glorification be preached. We never want to forget that we are the light of the world. The world's in darkness, and they don't care about light, most of them. And most of them are never going to come to the light. But for the few who might have an interest in light, that's you and me. And it was a stark reminder that people are watching. We always say that. We say that almost as a cliche. But, obviously somebody was watching last week who's not a member of this congregation, who is a Christian. They were a Christian. But they're not a member of this congregation, but they did view the class. We're not going to lose sight of the fact, folks, that we are the light of the world. We're not going to lose sight of the fact that we are going to have unity in the Spirit, that we have unity in the Spirit, and we're not going to lose sight of our calling, who we are, the resurrected life that we're called to live. And we're not going to lose sight of the will of the leadership of this congregation. And the leadership of this congregation has always promoted unity and peace. And we're just not going to violate that. That's just the end of that story. We're just not going to violate that. We're going to support these men who drive hard to be sure that the truth is taught in this congregation so that we can have peace and that we can have unity. And we're just not going to deviate from that. And so if you talk about things that happen in this class to other people, do that in the right framework of conversation so that this class does not become the focal point of this congregation. It is Christ and him crucified. And every brother and sister said what? Amen. It is Christ and him crucified. I'm going to teach the book the best way I know how and with the strength that I have just because I love his word. I do not have all of the answers. And my good brother and sister, you don't either. And so we must learn to respect that. When I was in Oklahoma preaching, a congregation of 700 people, we had not been there but 5 or 6 weeks. And a man and his wife on one Sunday evening said, "We'd like to come visit you one evening this week at your house." We agreed to that. I knew them. We'd been there 5 or 6 weeks, so I knew them in name. didn't know a lot of their history or so on and so forth, but they came to the house and came in and a cordial meeting. But finally, he got to the point that he was there for. He said, my wife and I have been married for 40 years. We both have previous marriages. We do not know if those marriages were dissolved for fornication or adultery. We have one child from each of our previous marriages, and we've had 3 more children since we have been married. Some of his children were full grown and married. One of the children was still in college, and I think he had a senior, if I recall. He said, it will not be very long. It's a conservative congregation. He said, it will not be very long till somebody will come to you, since you're the new minister in town, and they will say to you that you need to come and talk to us about the fact that we might be married, and a lot of the brethren will think our marriage is not legitimate because we've been honest about it and said we don't know if it's for fornication of adultery. But to save you time and energy, we're not dissolving our relationship. We're not going to allow this congregation to be the judge of our lives. And we're not changing our level of service to the Lord that we've been faithful to for 40 years. They became Christians after they were married. They were not Christians when they got married. And he said, we're not changing anything. So he said, don't waste your breath. And he said, whatever you do, don't think that you need to come over and take the Lord's communion trays out of our hands because you don't think we're worthy of communion. We are going to serve our God no matter what. And I thought, man, what is the matter with this guy? I was a whole lot younger then and a whole lot more stupid. His final words to me were, we are going to leave our fate in the hands of God on Judgment Day. And we will serve Him until that day. And he said that will be good enough for us, and it should be good enough for you. I'm glad he said what he said, even though I was offended by it and didn't have a high degree of receptivity to what he said, simply because it stopped me from being stupid with him. Because I would have taken him to Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 19. I would have demanded that they've done something, I don't know what, I guess probably divorced or something. And somehow or another, I would have had in my mind that a second divorce, unscripturally, because there was no fornication or marriage or adultery, would be more holy than the first divorce, where they said there evidently was no adultery and no fornication. And naturally, I would respond and say, well, but God didn't recognize that second marriage. Well, you know, the truth of the matter is I don't know what God did. And you don't either. But in our logic, we would say He cannot recognize that second marriage. But the truth of the matter is we really don't know what He does with that. In one of my counseling sessions, not that one, but another, it wasn't a counseling session, it was just a statement of fact. In a counseling session, I did have this situation, and I did a great job of going to Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 19. And then the lady asked me the question when I kind of had said, you know, I'm not sure you guys will be married. And this couple had 4 children. The lady asked me the real relevant question when she said, well, what do you want us to do with our children? I had it all laid out. But I didn't have that answer. These are difficult subjects, and I do not have all the answers to these difficult subjects. But Paul's fixing to tell us in chapters 8, 9, and 10 this morning. Well, before I say that, what is the one place where Paul will never give ground? There is a place where Paul will never ever give ground. Where is that? Do you know what that is? When it comes to the preaching of the gospel and Christ crucified, will he ever give an inch? He's never going to give an inch. Galatians chapter 2, verse 5. Acts chapter 15, when everybody said they had to be circumcised, Paul said, I got to go to Jerusalem. I'm meeting with the other apostles. We're going to get this mess cleaned up. Paul said, the gospel is sufficient, and I will defend that gospel no matter what. And there is no room for negotiation. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 in verse 12, as he talks about a weaker brother, he says, I will put up with anything in order to save some. Sounds like two different statements, doesn't it? And so we need to understand our theology in some context here, that there's some areas that we just don't know the answers to. And I went to our website trying to, some years ago, our elders penned their statement around marriage, divorce, remarriage, and they did an outstanding job. They are spot target on with their thinking. And they concluded, I remember Gary reading that from this very podium right here, this very pulpit right here. They concluded that at the end of the day, they're going to leave it up to God. Some things are going to be left up to God, brethren. We just don't know those answers. And we need to be comfortable there. We need to find some comfort there. We as human beings get ourselves wrapped around the axle in some of our situations to where it almost seems like it's impossible to get out of it. I don't know how far grace goes. Grace goes a long ways. It goes far enough to cover everything I've ever done. But I tell you what, I've seen murderers who've been on death row, who've subsequently been converted to life sentences, who ended up being gospel ministers. So who knows what the plan of God really is for some of us outside to be faithful to our calling. And we are called by the gospel, which is not negotiable. It just isn't. So I have my position on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. I've not stated it to this class, nor will I. Nor will I. If you need counseling, you come see me. I don't charge. And you know what? We'll talk about what I believe the Scriptures teach, and we'll go from there. But I'm going to tell you straight up front, I just don't know all the answers. I just don't. I just don't know all the answers. The last thing I'm going to do, though, is to discourage somebody from serving the Lord just because I have a very strong traditional view about something or because I don't know the answer about something. That's the last thing I'm going to do. Because on Judgment Day, I want the Lord to decide who are the sheep and who are the goats. Jennifer told me after class, she said, I think one of the things you're saying to me, there's some things I don't necessarily need to overly worry about. And you know what? That's exactly what Paul's going to tell you today. There's some things we don't need to get overly worked up about. Now last week, Stephen said, but Dave, are you saying that a homosexual can become a Christian and continue to be a homosexual? And I said, Stephen, you know me better than that. I don't think anybody can continue in sin. Do you believe that? I just don't know what to do about that situation while that homosexual individual works out whatever they're trying to work out. But I don't think they came to Jesus and were baptized with an insincere heart. You say, but they get newness of life. Yeah, we do get new. We get a resurrected life. Go over to Thailand and baptize a Buddhist and see what happens to you the next day when he goes to the feast to offer sacrifice to the idols. He's a brother in Christ. But he's got 4,000 years of history that he has to work through. And so we just need to be a little bit tender sometimes with our brothers and our sisters Because the last thing I want to do is to cause somebody to give up. How do you feel about causing that? Well, I made my case. I proved my point, and they quit. And I'm glad that scoundrel's out of here. You want to face Jesus with that? Is that where you want to be? That's not where we want to be. That is not.